Welcome to the Wild Crone Wisdom podcast. I'm Vinutha Mohan, your host and a licensed marriage and family therapist from the Bay Area, California, specializing in trauma and attachment repair. I'm also a certified EMDR specialist and a certified shamanic practitioner. Beyond therapy, I create spaces for authentic connections, teach workshops, blog, and offer spiritual healing. Being a therapist and a healer is my life's calling, and I look forward to sharing my journey with you. In this episode, we'll delve into the Goodgirl Syndrome that deeply influenced my upbringing. I'll share how my journey of fearless authenticity led me to challenge societal norms, become a therapist, and inspire others to break free from the chains of conformity. Join me as we explore the universal phenomenon of the Goodgirl Syndrome and discover the transformative power of embracing one's true self. I was born and raised primarily in South India. I belong to an elite class of South Indians, affectionately nicknamed Tamil Brahmins. Tam Brahms in general are brilliant intellectual snobs with severely repressed emotions, especially the sensual ones. It is understandable. After all, we are the descendants of the priestly caste. As a young girl in this social environment, you are initiated into the good girl conditioning school, preferably as early as possible, perhaps even in the womb. You're taught that it's important to be seen, not heard, not to have too many expectations of life, not to have any sensual desires, and to always wear a pleasant smile on your face. You're shown examples of revered women in our epics. When you get married, arranged of course, most of the time, why would you even ask? They recite the list of all these revered women, lest you should forget your obedience lessons, and then the elderly wise women in your family with somber looks whisper in their most serious and wise voice, whatever happens in your marriage, just adjust. This word adjust is a loaded legacy of Tam Brams, passed on for about 6,000 years, maybe. Within it is built tolerance for everything: abuse, neglect, incompatibility, abandonment, addiction, philandering, et al. Now, don't get me wrong. If you dig really deep, there are some nuggets of wisdom about kindness, compassion, tolerance, reframing, taking in the good, gratitude, etc. But how many of us dig deep? We barely question authority and take it all literally. So then, this is the etiology of the good girl syndrome. Fortunately, or unfortunately for me, my mother seemed to have played hooky from the good girl obedience school. She was anything but a good girl. So she did not pass on any of this adjustment disorder to me. As a young girl, growing up amongst hundreds of good girl aunties, I was shocked and embarrassed by my mother's brazen disregard for the good girl virtues. Today, not a day goes by that I don't thank her for not passing it on to me. So naturally, I was quite a badass amongst all these good girls. To escape this good girl setup, I ran away to America as soon as I got done with my undergrad, as I certainly did not fit with the good girl culture. Of course, in the US, I faced quite a bit of discrimination as the brown girl in the white dominated field of corporate finance. But that's a story for another day. Early on, I would hear some remarks from my white colleagues like, "We thought Indian women were subservient. How come you are so different?" I certainly did not hear that as a compliment. Years later, when I became a therapist and had the opportunity to work with women from all parts of the world, imagine my shock and surprise when I found out that the good girl syndrome was a universal phenomenon spanning across all cultures and continents. So, my natural curiosity aroused, I started studying them. The Jungian scholar and poet Clarissa Pinkola Estes, in her book Women Who Run with Wolves, an all time classic, notes that young girls are taught even before the age of 5 to not see, to make pretty ugly truths, to behave, and to be especially blind to being misused. This sort of cultural conditioning to be nice causes women to override their intuitions. Sometimes this results in submitting to predators and getting entangled in abusive relationships. Many times, it causes women to be blind to microaggressions, often experienced within the context of their immediate family and in their social groups. Often, their own mothers and grandmothers collude with the aggressors because they too are victims of the same conditioning. All this early conditioning to be a good girl results in many women to have no integrity of vision, no deep insight, no original voice, and take no decisive action, concludes Clarissa. And I have observed this to be very true with friends and clients alike. Good girls are some of the most unhappy human beings that I've ever met. They suffer from low grade depression, anxiety, and many psychosomatic disorders, including migraines, gut problems, thyroid issues, ulcers, and in some serious cases, cancers of the organs of nurturance, such as breast, ovaries, etc. And their repressed anger is epic. Of course, I have no research data to prove this, just an educated guess and clinical experience. Good girls martyr themselves in their marriages, their mothering, and at their work, faithfully nailing themselves to their cross. And of course, smiling through it all. As they age, for some, something breaks through as they begin to ask the most dangerous question: what about me? I know many of my friends who are struggling with their aging mothers who have become so passive aggressive and resentful that it's been challenging to manage them. Good girls have only two reactions to me. They either adore me because I represent all of their shadow side, or they fear me because their moms have warned them with stern looks to stay away from my influence. Sometimes I've heard that warning from their husbands too. Stay away from her, she's trouble. Do you know the irony of it all? You guessed it right. I have several good girls as my best friends. I adore them. They're genuinely wonderful human beings. And they bask in the knowledge that their badass girlfriend will always have their back. I voice everything that they would never dare to. I challenge their husbands and their parents and in laws, and I express everything that they would never dare to openly verbalize. And I constantly challenge them to break their good girl conditioning. What is the best way then to break out of this condition, you might ask? Every woman must practice accessing her contentious nature first. This contentious nature is your wild, instinctive, dark, feminine energy, often called Kali, Durga, Athena, Sophia, which, when accessed and focused, gives tremendous energy to a woman. In the East, we call this energy Shakti. Harnessing this fierce Shakti, a woman must ask some tough questions of herself, such as: what do I instinctively know to be true that I wish I did not know? What lies behind the doors in my psyche that I have shut tightly? What parts of me have been killed or lay dying? Who was I before the world told me who I needed to be in order to belong and be loved? The right questions are the key to opening these secret doors in your psyche, behind which lie so many rich and intuitive gifts from the goddess, the sacred feminine energy, Shakti. If instead you choose to live on autopilot without ever asking these questions, It will mean that your sacred feminine is dying a slow death behind the facade of a picture perfect family, wealth, and fame. My biggest cheerleader in my personal journey of transformation was one of my dearest friends, who I lost to cancer a few years ago. She was the epitome of the good girl conditioning. She adored her badass girlfriend. Every time I came out with a snarky comment, she would produce a background score for it. Chadak! That sounded like me chopping someone's head off. It makes sense. After all, I'm a priestess of goddess Kali. Kali, for those who don't know her, is the ultimate iconographic symbol of a badass goddess. She's bare breasted, wears a skull necklace, tongue sticking out, and is dancing on a corpse. Doesn't get any more badass than that. So my friend would constantly goad me to bring out that Kali energy in me. And if I tried to tone it down, would lament that I had become too boring for her. So much so that even as she lay dying on her hospital bed, she didn't want me to tone it down. I would often joke with her that if I ended up in bad girl hell, I was going to take her down with me. Having grown up with constantly hearing praise for the good girls, occasionally I would have a twinge of longing to be called a good girl too. Then I would look at my life, my fierce authenticity, the absolute honesty in my marriage, how safe my friends feel around me because they know exactly where they stand with me, how my clients find me refreshing, how my children and godchildren always come to me with their most vulnerable truths, how boundaried and drama free my life is. And I smile with the satisfaction of a well fed Cheshire cat. For being such a bad girl, I ended up with a life that every good girl dreams of. And I'm so grateful. Furthermore, I remind myself the world was seldom changed by well behaved women. Thanks for listening to the first episode of Wild Crone Wisdom. In this series, we delve into the journey of our spiritual essence having a human experience. While many social scientists study human emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and others explore transcendental experiences, few bridge the gap to help embody spiritual wisdom in everyday life. I call this the psycho-spiritual path. Through this podcast, I hope to share bite-sized practical insights for navigating life as an empowered sovereign being. If you found this episode valuable, we'd greatly appreciate your support. Please consider rating, reviewing, commenting, and subscribing on your podcast platform to help us reach a wider audience. You can explore more of my writings on Medium by following the link in the show notes. We'd also love to hear about your experience, so feel free to share your thoughts with us at wildcronewisdompodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for being part of our journey. Please be advised, the information provided in the Wild Crone Wisdom podcast is intended for general information purposes only. Vinutha Mohan is a licensed therapist and healer. However, the content shared in this podcast does not replace or constitute professional advice, therapy, or counseling. It is essential to consult with a qualified mental health professional for personalized guidance regarding your unique circumstances. Thank you.